We're going to be on time, starting at 11:30 on the dot, with or without my fellow members on a Friday morning. Hello, everyone. We are going to get started with our hearing for this afternoon. We've allotted an hour for this. We have 3 different agencies and would, if possible, would like to leave here by 12:30 so that you can have the afternoon off, and so can I. We're going to start with the Maryland Stadium Authority. Patrick Frank is the budget analyst, and Michael J. Friends is here from the agency. Welcome.
Okay. All right, the Maryland Stadium Authority, at the top of the first page is a description of what they do. Basically, they manage the Orioles and the Ravens stadiums. They do the bond programs and construction for the Baltimore City schools, Built to Learn. They also are working with Laurel Park and Pimlico to upgrade those facilities. They were involved with the Hippodome project, the Montgomery Conference Center, and a number of other projects too. Page 1 at the bottom shows the different fund sources, and these funds vary tremendously because of the large construction component of the budget. But I'll go through this quickly. The general funds, that blue part at the bottom, what that is mostly is convention center subsidies and some debt service costs. The yellow is mostly supported by lottery funds, and what that does is pay the debt service. There's also a sports entertainment event program fund that is funded out of that too, to bring events into the area. The red part is non-budgeted funds. Those are mostly the proceeds from the bonds, and that pays for the construction work, and there's a little bit of project core in reimbursable funds. Page 2, quickly I'll go through. There were 2 priorities, legislative priorities from last year's budget: $250,000 for televised live sports events and $125,000 for an economic and market feasibility study for Charles County. There are 2 deficiencies proposed in this budget. One is to give another $1.98 million to the Baltimore City Convention Center. The state pays 2/3 of the subsidy. The subsidy apparently is going to need to be larger than was budgeted. Also, $1.3 million in special funds is coming out of the major event fund. Page 3 has our pie chart that shows the spending. I'm going to just talk. I think there's 4 slices of the pie that really matter the most here. The first is the orange one, that $53 million. That's the operations of the Stadium Authority. Without that orange slice, the other slices don't really happen. Secondly, I would point out the blue, the $201 million in special funds. Those are the debt service payments to pay the bond proceeds. Once again, without those proceeds, you don't have the construction program. A third one I point out is the kind of the purple bar, the lighter purple bar. That's, as I mentioned, the convention center funds and just the general funds. And finally, there's some debt service and general funds. Now, the other slices that are non-budgeted funds, those are the proceeds for the projects. I kind of give a lot of detail in the first 3 pages, so I'm going to skip the next 5 pages. 4 and 5 provide more specific numbers, and 6, 7, and 8 discuss the budget in more detail. But in the interest of time, I'll move right on to the big issue that is facing the agency at this time, and that is the Oriole Stadium at Camden Yards lease. It's basically a quick rundown. In 2022, there was additional money provided for both the Orioles and the Ravens. Each got $600 million in debt outstanding and $45 million to pay down those, so equal amounts to both. The Ravens essentially renewed their lease before the ink was dry, because they before the session even began, they had the Board of Public Works approve a new lease. A few months later this summer, they bonds were issued for the Ravens Stadium. That's moving across very quickly. The Orioles is a little bit more complicated, and that's what the next 7 pages essentially are going to be about. First thing I was curious about is the subsidy that we have for construction. How common is that? And I was fortunate. It's hard to find information for these that's aggregated and things, but I was able to find in the Buffalo News prepared something. And if you go to page 10, Exhibit 3, what you'll show here is this basically compares 4 different things essentially. The first thing it looks at is how much of this is the subsidy. What share of the construction cost is the subsidy? What I did then, since this is 21 different stadiums, so I said there's large subsidies and small subsidies. The difference between it is who's median, above the median, basically. Also, I was curious about the size of the metropolitan area that the teams are in. So I got some Bureau of Economic Analysis data about metropolitan area sizes. Once again, there's 2 kinds. If you're above the median, you're large. If you're below the median, you're small. So what was really interesting is if you draw lines by 40 and 70%, below 40%, all but are the large metropolitan areas, and there's the subsidy there. They got smaller subsidies. And examples of that, of the ones that with zero subsidies, is New York and Los Angeles. Each of them has 2 teams, so apparently you'll go free there. The other side of this is above 70%. That those are your small, dominated by smaller markets. So it does appear that there is a relationship between your market size and the subsidy that you give to stadiums. Baltimore is a smaller subsidy, a smaller market, so there is the larger subsidy was given. Page 11 is kind of an update of where we are on the lease and what some of the key attributes of the characteristics of it. The first thing I want to say is there is a new lease, and it is for 30 years. And some of the changes that are being contemplated are the key ones are moving operation and maintenance from the Stadium Authority and having the Orioles team do that. Under the Ravens agreement, it's the same as arrangement is that the stadium does it and reimburses the Ravens. There's also another change in the lease is giving them $3.3 million a year in order to do the operation and maintenance. And finally, what's gotten a lot of attention is the idea of ground lease. And so the Stadium Authority would lease some area around that is owned by the Stadium Authority to the team in order for them to develop it. So on page 12 is kind of a map. I'll talk about the ground leases first. The first thing that you talk, even people who go to the stadiums, their eyes glaze over pretty quickly when you start talking about which parcel is which. So on page 12, there's a map. What that map shows is the orange part is how the statute defines MSA property. So anything inside the orange is MSA property. Within the property, you can see on the north side is the Orioles ballpark, and on the south side is the Ravens stadium. I also drew in 3 different lots and parcels, if you will. First to the north is it kind of goes pretty much almost all the way around the Orioles stadium. That's the ground lease that was proposed that the Orioles would get in the memorandum of understanding from September. There's 2 other parcels I think that are interesting too. There's what's called Lot A, which is the little striped area, and the area below Lee Street, which is the dotted area. On those last 2, the Lot A and the area below Lee Street, that could be developed, but it would require a master development agreement. All the teams would have to agree on what has to be done, Stadium Authority. So that process would take a while, but it could conceivably also be developed. So that's kind of what we're talking about with that. Now, what on page 13 is the question is, well, how much would the state get for this? Exhibit 6 shows the Orioles, what the Orioles would get. And I also was able to find that the Colorado Rockies also have an arrangement like this, and I couldn't find any others. So the comparisons between the 2. And what this shows is it shows the lease payments. In Colorado, it's $7.5 million for the first 5 years, then $5 million for years 6 to 20. And then and the Orioles is a similar arrangement, although it's $1.5 million for the first 5 years, then $500,000 from years 6 to 30, and then after that it goes to $750,000. It's kind of, I thought it was curious that revenues are less in the out years than in, that's you don't see that all the time. Also, I showed in there that like if you apply, say, a 2% inflation rate, what the money is worth over time. So that's kind of the cost. Another issue, page 14, that is kind of mentioned earlier, is the whole maintenance of the new stadium. The obvious concern is that the state wants that stadium to be maintained at the highest standards. And so, I talked with the Stadium Authority about what would they do to ensure that it's the highest standards. And they said there's quite a few things they can do. There are clear standards that are out there that they can adhere to. They want to make sure there's experience management. There is technology you could use to monitor this. There could be meetings, audits, inspections, things like that. And so the MSA says they will do all these things in order to keep the stadium maintained well. And so finally, on the last thing I'll talk about really about this lease is where does it stand right now? Basically, the ground lease issue has not been decided yet. And so what's happening is the 2 sides, the team and the Stadium Authority, should by December of 2027 work out some kind of a ground lease agreement. It may look like what was in the MOU, but it does not have to look that way. That's if that were to happen, and if there was a ground lease, then what would happen is there would be what's called they always would execute what they call their facility use agreement. And that essentially is that O&M would go over to the team. And if there is the ground lease this lease would be for 30 years. And with 2 5-year renewals. And okay, the other question then, well, what if there isn't an agreement made about the ground lease? Well, then there are 3 things that could happen. The Orioles could pick one of these 3. The first, they could continue, but what's called the base agreement that they have now, which is the old agreement, and for the whole 30 years. And a second option is they could continue the base agreement, but reduce the term to 15 years with 2 5-year renewals. So they could shorten the lease. And the final thing they could do is they could choose to execute the facility use agreement, which is to say the Orioles would then do O&M. But if that were to be done, it would stay as a 30-year lease. So those are kind of the 3 outcomes that are outlined in the agreement that is right now. But like I said, there is a lease. It's just what it looks like we're not sure about. Final point I want to make is by state law, and this is a good law, the bonds maturities cannot exceed the lease terms. Because we don't want to spend, if they leave after 15 years, we don't want to explain why we're paying 15 more years on the bonds, obviously. And so effectively, initially, until there's an agreement, we know it's 30 years, the bonds really are limited to those 15 years of the current lease. All right, 4 questions I kind of have, and to finish off this issue, first is, if you notice, the lease is 30 years, maybe a few extensions, 99 years is the ground lease. So why is it 69 years more? And what's to protect the state that to keep the team longer? Also, the stadium authority would lose cash flows that they're getting from the ground lease. What's the fair market value, and how do you price? Because those cash flows help pay for its budget. We don't give the stadium authority unless there's a pandemic. We don't give them any state funds. They have to fund their own things. Thirdly, there's this idea of parity between the Orioles and the Ravens. What does parity look like when the Orioles get an improved property? I don't know the answer to that question, but it seems like that we should think about it. And also whatever tax and revenue implications there are. That's really the big issue. I'll just kind of mention that there's work being done. They were busy this year, the stadium authority. There's work being done on the convention center. Like I said, the Ravens bonds were issued for minor league baseball. There's a blue corridor line project that's being done. And so there's short updates about all those things. And with that, I'll say our recommendation is to concur, and I'll conclude my remarks and take questions.
Okay, any questions? Okay, take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. We're pleased to be here today to discuss the budget with the committee. I'm here today with Craig Thompson, our chairman, Terry Hasseltine to Mr. Thompson's left, the head of Maryland Sports, the State Sports Commission. To the far right, Dawn Abshire, our CFO, and to my immediate right, Gary McGuigan, who is in charge of our capital projects development group. I want to thank Mr. Frank for the thorough analysis he performed. We've reviewed the analysis and recommendations, and we'll now Mr. Thompson would like to make a few short remarks, and then we'll address the issues identified by Mr. Frank in his report.
Thank you, Mike, and good morning, Madam Chair. Good to see you again, members. Good to see you again, and very nice to meet you, Senator Bailey. Just wanted to give greetings on behalf of the 10 members of the board of the Stadium Authority. I'd like to note for the record that Stadium Authority board member Joe Bryce is also with us today. We are very thankful for the committee's time and anxious to respond to your questions. So thank you for allowing me a few minutes just to say hello.
Thank you, Craig. First issue, the $250,000 grant to facilitate Maryland televised sports events. Terry, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. In the presentation, you see the highlights of the program. We took this as a pilot program since it was the first time this fund was initiated. We looked at it in correlation with our 2 grant programs we currently have, which is the Michael Aaron Bush Fund and the Youth and Amateur Sports Grant, and then secondarily our Major Events Fund. Secondarily, we aligned with groups that were already looking to do and or had the capability of doing video digital and or broadcast opportunities, a chance to enhance and or grow the product they're already producing, and or something that was identified as net new to their programming that they've been asking for years, but we just didn't have the source or the resource in which to provide it. This gave great opportunity to those. So we locked in on looking at diverse groups of events that met inclusivity, diversity, and equity among competition, participants, and the sports groups, and the growth of the sports in the state of Maryland. We looked at everything from grassroots to scholastic to collegiate to international competitions, everything from kickball to Quidditch to soccer through lacrosse and running. We identified well over 15 events to look at, review, and also award funding to, and also identified a partner that can help us catalog as well as to round this content into what will be at the end of the day a great sports tourism video for the state of Maryland based on a very robust and very diverse population base of activities. We awarded grants anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000, depending on complexity of the opportunity, the geographic diversity, and the overall audience in which it reached. The end goal with this program is to make sure that we captured a diverse set of content and made sure that at the end we highlight and showcase Maryland as the world-class sports destination that it is, and making sure that all sports and all people were represented in the activities in which we assign the funds to. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Gary, would you like to address the issue pertaining to the $125,000 for the study for the Charles County Amphitheater?
Thanks, Mike. Madam Chair, members of the committee, good to see you again. So when this, the $125,000 was passed last year in the operating budget, it was identified that the program would be for an amphitheater. And upon discussions with the county and negotiations of the MOU during the year, became quickly apparent that they're looking for a sports, wellness, and entertainment complex. So it's my belief the county is going to fix that language this year, or put some language in to fix that, and will be off and going with the study July 1st. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. First, I'll address the recommendation made by Mr. in the report that if operations and maintenance become the responsibility of the Orioles, the recommendation that MSA develop managing for results indicators for maintenance quality. In his report, Mr. Frank did a good job of outlining the process we would use to ensure quality. And as part of that process, the Orioles will have technology tools that will allow easy access to statistical information. So we're happy to report meaningful indicators as part of an overall report to the General Assembly, if and when the Orioles take over operations and maintenance at the stadium. The four issues that Mr. Frank identified in the lease, the first being, why does the state offer the team a ground lease exceeding the stadium lease period by 69 years? MSA and the Orioles agreed to an extension of the existing lease of the ballpark to afford the Orioles the time needed to conduct due diligence as to potential development of designated parcels around the ballpark. Absent that preliminary due diligence, which includes things like market and environmental impact studies and design, architectural engineering work, it was premature to enter into a ground lease of development rights with the team. As such, there is no ground lease at this juncture. Assuming that the team meets benchmarks established in the lease extension, the duration, rent, and other terms of the ground lease will be subject to negotiations between the parties and also subject to all required state approval processes. Secondly, the fair market value for the cash flows lost if MSA offers ground leases to the team. How will this be determined? To determine the net fair market value to the state of a ground lease to the Orioles, MSA would need to determine the revenue generating opportunities that would be lost at the time that the ground lease is entered into. For example, private leases at the warehouse or Camden Station, parking revenues, etc. This prediction is complicated because any such loss may not occur for several years. In addition, MSA would need to determine the fair market value of the economic benefits to the state and city. For example, rent payments under the ground lease, revenue streams likely to be generated, such as a variety of taxes. Given no knowledge of the planned projects that may come to fruition, there are too many unknown variables at this time to make a reliable forecast of those figures. We recognize, however, that the Legislative Policy Committee The Board of Public Works will expect such economic analysis to be provided if and when a ground lease is brought back for required approvals. With respect to the issue about parity between the Orioles and the Ravens, the report actually outlined two parity issues. The first being potential development rights granted to the Orioles. If the Orioles proceed to exercise their right to development in compliance with all benchmarks and required approvals, then we believe the Ravens would have the right to request an amendment to their lease to obtain a comparable benefit. With respect to the second question, if a form of the facility use agreement attached to the lease extension becomes an operative document and the Orioles then take over operations and maintenance, we believe the Ravens would then have the right to seek an amendment to their lease to allow for a comparable operations and maintenance paradigm. And of course, discussions with the Ravens on this topic and other topics are ongoing. What are the potential tax implications of a ground lease with the team? The purpose of entering into a potential ground lease with the Orioles is to increase economic benefit to the state and city of Baltimore. MSA is not a taxing authority, however, and therefore we cannot impose property or income taxes in connection with the potential development. Here again, the tax implications and impact on state and local revenues remain uncertain due to a host of unknown variables. Type of development, how much of the available site is involved, the value of particular projects, et cetera. Once these variables are known, then the questions of tax imposition and implications are more properly within the purview of the State Department of Assessments and Taxation, the Controller of Maryland, and the city's Department of Finance. At this point, that's what we have with respect to our written testimony, and we're happy to answer any questions about our testimony or any other questions you might have. Thank you.
Okay. You have any questions? Senator Bailey?
I just wanted to express on behalf of Senator Paul Quarterman how much he wanted to be here today. There was an issue that occurred. He couldn't be here, but he wanted to thank you all for the work that you have done and provided for the sports stadium in his area. In speaking with that, and as we're approaching the anniversary as we move forward with the Fort to 400, I know that we have reached out to you and you're working on the second phase for us of what's available at historic St. Mary's City and how that will look moving forward. And I didn't know how the second phase of that was progressing.
Gary, do you want to answer that question?
Sure. We've been negotiating an MOU with the county. It's my understanding the county will execute that by the end of this month. So we'll be able to go to work.
Thank you very much. And the same with the sports complex that they're working on with St. Mary's. Is that in the, I think they told me anyway, I thought I understood they paid the bill.
Actually, Senator, forgive me. That answers to the second question. We have not, I would need to get back to you on the historic St. Mary's if I could.
Okay.
But the MOU for the sports complex is going to the council at the end of this month.
Okay. All right.
Happy to do that.
Thank you very much.
Very much. Thank you for your presentation. I want to talk a little bit about the Blue Line. The Wayne Curry Plaza. Could you kind of elaborate that? It's my understanding that additional money was given through the Board of Public Works for that project. Is that not true?
So the Wayne Curry Plaza is currently in programming. It was approved by the Board of Public Works the end of last year, the first phase of that. It's a design build contract. We expect the full effort to take 2 years, and we issued a notice to proceed earlier this month.
Okay. So is there some confusion as to whether or not that should come under the Board of the Office of Economic Development? I know right now that they're asking for another $10 million as it pertains to the Wayne Curry Plaza, but it's coming under the Maryland National Capital Park and right now it's under the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning, and it's supposed to, it's a request for it to come under the Board of Public Work, Board of Economic Development. And they're asking for an additional $10 million. Am I confused on that?
It's the first I've heard of it, Senator. My understanding is the project is supposed to be 10 million or less. And the funding, as I know it today, is that it's coming out of the Blue Line funds. I have not heard of any other funding sources for it, but I can look into that and get back to you.
And when we talk about the Blue Line, it starts in Largo and goes all the way down to the district line?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, looks good. Thank you very much.
Thank
We'll do
you.
the best we can.
Thank you.
Next, we have the Maryland State Library Agency. Laura Hyde is the budget analyst and Irene Padilla is the agency representative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Again, this is the budget analysis for the Maryland State Library Agency, and we're starting on page 1 with the operating budget summary. You can see that MSLA's fiscal 25 budget increases by approximately $4 million to $103.9 million. The majority of these funds are general funds. Then if you'll just turn to page 2, quickly under implementation of legislative priorities, chapters 649 and 650 of 2023 transfer the Baltimore City Young Readers Program and the Young Readers Matching Grant Program to MSLA. And the act increases the mandate for the Young Readers Matching Grant Program from $250,000 to $350,000. In the fiscal 25 proposed budget, both programs are budgeted under MSLA. And the Baltimore City Young Readers Program receives $200,000, which is the minimum mandate for this program. At the time of this analysis, the grant administration for this program in fiscal 24 was unclear. And so that's the reason for the bold language in that section. There's also a proposed deficiency allocation for MSLA of $215,000, which includes contractual services for renovation of elevators at the library for the blind and print disabled, salary adjustments, and a contractual FTE for the Young Readers Matching Grant Program. And there's bold language that asks MSLA to comment on these pay adjustments. Then if you'll turn to Exhibit 1, that's on page 5. You can see the overview of agency spending. Again, the expenditures are $103.9 million, with the majority, almost the majority, 50% of aid going to public library aid, 51.9 or $52 million. Then library retirement receives 23% or $23.7 million. The state library network, $21.7 million or 21%, and then the rest is for personnel and operating expenses. Turning to page 6, under the proposed budget change, this is Exhibit 2. You can see the allowance and then the change for $4.2 million or about 4.2% increase over fiscal 24. As stated previously, the change is primarily in library retirement, which increases $2.5 million, but there's also increases for public library aid formula funding, $814,000, and the net change for the 2 grant programs I mentioned of $419,000. There's also decreases for the fiscal 24 deficiency allocations and miscellaneous operating expenses. Turning to page 8, under personnel, MSLA has 33 positions in the FY25 allowance. That's 1 more position than in fiscal 24. In calendar 23, MSLA hired filled 3 positions: a management associate for the Maryland Accessible Textbook Program, a procurement officer, and a communications manager. And then in fiscal 24, they expect to be able to fill a position for the Young Readers Matching Grant Program. And the fiscal 25 allowance reflects that position as a regular position. Then turning to page 9, this is Exhibit 3. This is one of the MFR measures, library programs and attendance, which show a slight increase from fiscal 22. This is fiscal 23 actual data. However, these outcomes have not returned to pre-COVID levels. And so there's bold language asking MSLA to comment on efforts to improve these measures. Then turning to Exhibit 4, this is on page 10. This is digital materials owned and accessed. This is a revised revised data in this measure and shows an increase in fiscal 22. And then in Exhibit 5, that's on page 11, this is Library of the Blind and Print Disabled, Patron Served and Materials Access. This also shows an increase in patron served and materials access in both measures from fiscal 22 to fiscal 23. So DLS recommends to concur with the governor's allowance. This completes my presentation and I stand for questions.
Welcome.
Thank you.
You know, I just got a reminder sent to me this morning that you were retiring.
Yes,
I don't know how we will manage this. You and I have worked together a lot of years.
I know.
Yes.
Yes, I will miss all of my colleagues throughout the
Well,
state. That's
you
for
will sure be missed by the agency too, I'll tell you.
Thank
You've done yeoman's work, so
Thank
well appreciated and good luck on that retirement.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, you can take it away.
Okay, well, I was going to say good morning, but it just officially turned into afternoon. So glad to be here before you, Chairperson King and one member of the committee, Senator Benson. So good to see you. I'm Irene Padilla. I'm the state librarian, and with me today is Donna Liberto. She's our chief financial officer. And in the audience, we have Tamar Sarnoff, who's the director of the Public Libraries and State Networking section of our agency, and Tim Pratt, who's our communications manager. So we are here in support of our budget for FY25. And I want to, before I move on, thank Laura Hyde for her very thorough analysis with which we concur. Laura worked so well with us and we are so grateful to have her on as part of our team, can I say? Okay, so the Maryland State Library Agency, as you know, administers state and federal funds to support Maryland libraries. And as an independent agency established just 6.5 years ago, thanks to many of the people in this room, we are working hard to support the 192 public library branches and the 22 mobile libraries that are around the state. We have over 3.5 million registered borrowers. 55% of Marylanders have a library card. Fiscal 22, patrons borrowed more than 47 million items and library staff answered over 3.5 million questions. In-person visits to the library buildings top 12 million and library events have more than 1 million attendees. Many Marylanders rely on their library branches, as you know, for access to computers and the internet. And we have a new report from the EBA Foundation that I have mentioned here before, but the 2023 report notes some changes. Right now, 20% of Maryland households do not subscribe to broadband service. This is a positive change because the 2021 study, it was 23%. So we are making improvements. 3% of Maryland households do not have a computer. Another positive change from the 18% in 2021. However, 140,000 households with children do not have access to broadband, and this is an increase of more than 400%.
And that's more in the rural areas.
It's really it's pretty widespread here well, I shouldn't say here, in the city as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So I know the Pratt Library is doing as much as they can to work with people. And the beauty of these mobile libraries is that's why we call them mobile libraries anymore, not bookmobiles, is they actually have Wi-Fi and other things, and they move around the neighborhoods to help provide access. So
You'd think we would be farther along than that.
I know. But the good news is that we're working with Governor Moore's Maryland Act Now campaign. And that would, working with that, people can get free access to the internet. And so we are really promoting that through our libraries to to tackle what we call the digital divide, that we started talking about in the 90s when we had digital. And here we are still talking about it. So it's just something that's very, very important. We're also working with the University of Maryland Extension School to address digital literacy and digital navigation needs. So that's a real boon to us. Because public libraries continue to provide more than 5,000 computers for public access, as well as free Wi-Fi, we feel we are doing as much as we can, along with the mobile units, to make sure people have access to computers. And one of the interesting things is wireless internet uses, which really grew during the pandemic, have now increased to a record 12.5 million access points. So that's really amazing.
So I have a question. Are there more people actually going to the libraries now than there were before the pandemic?
I don't know
Think it's-
that answer.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm just wondering if
We
people
can-
going to the libraries has picked up any since the pandemic, or,
it has picked up,
okay.
but whether we're back to the levels pre-pandemic, I don't know. If
Okay.
you'd like us to look into that,
No.
I'd be happy to get back to
No, I just
Okay.
was curious, that's
Yeah,
all.
yeah. Well,
Okay,
it's a good question. So
thank you.
we'll look into it either way. Okay, so as you know, one of the bills passed last year is the Young Readers Program Expansion Act. And this program helps subsidize free books for children birth through 5 through the Dolly Parton Imagination Library. And with this additional funding, we'll be able to subsidize 35,000 more children throughout the state. It's still a drop in the bucket, but it's certainly an improvement. And just think about being able to receive a free book in the mail every month. I would have loved that as a child. And these children really need this exposure. They need to, what we want to encourage is a love of reading and prepare them to come to school ready to learn. So we're also overseeing the other piece of it, which was pre-existing, that reaches out to the city's children. And we're working with the Enoch Pratt Free Library State Library Resource Center on that. So we're partners in that. So we've been asked to comment on the program, and I've put more information in our written testimony, but just some summary points. We have now hired the full-time for this year contractual person for this position. Starts working on January 31st, fresh out of college. We're so excited. And this will be a permanent position if the budget is passed. We're working, as I said, with the State Library Resource Center. And we have been working on the program. There's been a little confusion as to how the funding will be transferred. It will all be worked out in FY25, but this year has been a little confusing because the funding wasn't appropriated into our budget for this year. So working through that, but what this has given us the time to do custom surveys, work with focus groups and census data to help establish the program, the standards that we want to implement. And we've been able to reach out to all of the county affiliates across the state and talk to them about what their needs are. So they're excited that the program is on its way. And what we're going to emphasize is we would like our local affiliates to spend grant funds in high poverty zip codes, as well as identify potential affiliates in unrepresented areas. You have to remember, these are all volunteers doing this. So, they're really grateful to have some support from the state. So that distribution of grant funds will start this spring. And then next year, we'll keep doing the same thing. We'll go back and review what we've been doing and continue to develop the program. So I'm very optimistic about this program. It's great. It's a great match for our agency. And the second item we were asked to comment on is the reason for the 2024 deficiency allocation for salary adjustments and reclassifications. And what we are doing as an agency is following Governor Moore's goals outlined in the plan for rebuilding state government. And basically that calls for agencies to review staff positions for necessary salary adjustments. equity reviews and non-competitive promotions for retention requests. So we have been working very hard on that, and we're pleased that we will have some funds to work with to make some of those changes happen. We want to be able to compete. We have very great staff, hardworking, but we want to be able to compete with the local organizations and counties, especially that pay higher wages. And finally, we've been asked to comment on the efforts to increase program offerings. And part of that is just happening because we're not in the pandemic and people are coming and going and they don't have to wear a mask. So it's really put us in a good spot. But since in-person programming has been a cornerstone of libraries, we're continuing to do a lot of that, but we've also built in the virtual aspect as well. So we're not going to let that go because a lot of people just can't get away. And people rely now on the convenience of virtual programs. The Library for the Blind has been working very hard on podcasts that they are offered through our website. And they've also increased their volunteers teaching people how to use computers, people who are print disabled, and how can they make the best use of the computers they have. And then we're working together. As you see, we have our communications manager, which he came on board in October. We're very thrilled about that. And we're already offering new blog posts and social media campaigns, videos, additional podcasts, and starting to establish partnerships across the state. So in summary, we concur with the analysts' recommendations and thank the General Assembly and this committee so much for your support of libraries throughout the state. And we'll take any questions.
Thank you very much. Kind of nostalgic knowing that's probably your last one, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Of a budget. Well, I have 2 capital budget hearings, so ways to go.
We'll see more of you.
Yes.
Senator Benson, any questions? Senator Bailey?
Nice conference.
I'll be able to answer this question. I really like the Young Readers program that's in Baltimore. I think that's excellent where children are exposed to reading materials. For me, for families that don't get the newspaper, it really is an effective tool. The question I asked, however, is who evaluates the effectiveness of this program?
That's part of what we have to do. That's part of our responsibility through the bill. There are some, we have to report back and let the General Assembly know what we're doing with this program.
So there's no data that shows.
And we will track all of the data. And what we want to see, one of the biggest things is to see the program grow, to see us reach more children. And with the city program, it's really going to be enhanced by being part of the Enoch Pratt program because they have a foundation. They have so many ways of reaching children throughout the city that have not been used so far. So they may be able to get some support other than through the state.
It sounds very exciting.
Yeah, I agree.
For the little children to have their own books, I'm sure they look forward to. I was just wondering, do we collect the data to see how effective the program has been?
Yes, we will definitely do that, and we will report back on that.
I'd be curious to see that.
Okay, we'll keep you posted on that then, definitely.
Thank you.
Tamara Sarnoff is here. She's overseeing the program, so I'm
Good.
sure she's taking notes.
Well, thank you for coming today.
Thank
And
you.
I don't think there are any other questions, and
Okay.
we will see you for your capital budget.
Thank you, Senator Bailey.
Okay, last on the list here today is the Maryland Economic Development Corporation, Medco. Want to come up? Good afternoon. We'll be starting with Elizabeth Weibel, who is the budget analyst, and then we'll ask you to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Senator Benson. My name is Elizabeth Weibel. I'll be presenting a financial overview of the Maryland Economic Development Corporation, or MEDCO. This is a non-budgeted entity created to serve as a statewide economic development engine. It has the ability to own and develop property as well as to issue bonds and make loans. and each project must have self-supporting revenue, and Medco's debt is not considered debt of the state. Historically, Medco has been involved in two types of projects. Those are operating facilities, where it has a hand in management decisions, and conduit projects, where it acts as an arm's length financing entity. If you skip ahead in your analysis to page 5, Exhibit 1 shows Medco's net assets divided into its operating facilities, which are represented by the orange line at the bottom, and all of its other assets, which are represented by the blue line at the top. The net assets for Medco are comprised primarily of the value of properties offset by outstanding debt or capital lease obligations. As you can see here in Exhibit 1, net assets of Medco's operating facilities decreased in fiscal 2023. However, Medco reports that net losses and net assets are not uncommon for real estate companies, and they're not a concern as long as the operating revenues continue to exceed the cash operating expenses, and this has been the case. In fiscal 2023, operating facilities revenues increased 11% from 2022 and continued to exceed expenses for a net operating income of $33 million. Turning now to pages 6 and 7, Exhibit 2 breaks down the operating income and loss by project. Most of Medco's operating facilities are student housing at universities, which are at the top of the table there. 2 projects posted net losses in fiscal 2023. One project that had posted a loss in the prior year, that's the housing at Capital Technology University, posted a positive income in fiscal 2023. Looking at Morgan State University's income, you'll see that it's quite a bit higher for 2023. This is due in large part to a new student housing facility that opened in August of 22. And Medco is currently constructing another student housing facility at Morgan State that is expected to open in August of this year. Medco reports that as of fiscal 2022, student housing income had fully recovered from the downturn during the pandemic. Turning now to page 9, Exhibit 3, Medco also looks at the debt coverage ratio for projects, which is the ratio of net operating income to debt service payments. In Exhibit 3, you can see the debt coverage ratio for Medco student housing. Projects that don't meet a specific debt coverage ratio are placed on watch status. And as of September 23, Medco had 2 student housing projects on watch status, which is down from 3 at the same time in the prior year. The agency reports that all projects are able to cover their operating expenses. The Chesapeake Bay Conference Center is not on this table, but it has been considered a non-performing project since before the pandemic. Medco reports that the conference center is able to cover all of its operating expenses, but the revenues are not sufficient to make full debt service payments. Investors have repeatedly extended 6-month forbearance agreements over the past several years, and Medco expects those agreements to continue to be extended. The conference center did post positive incomes in both fiscal 2023 and 22, which you can see in the full list of projects in Exhibit 2. On page 11, you'll see our recommendation, which is that Medco is a non-budgeted agency and DLS essentially has no recommendations. That concludes my presentation, and I can take any questions.
Thank you. Nice job. Hello.
Hello. Well, if I may, Madam Chair, thank you very much for having us today. And we'd like to start by thanking Elizabeth for her excellent report. She's been just a terrific budget analyst, and we very much appreciate her efforts. I'm Tom Sadowski. I'm Executive Director of the Maryland Economic Development Corporation. And with me here today is our CFO, Jim Miller, to answer any questions. We've provided some written testimony for your consideration, as well as our annual legislative report from last year. And that report, typically, it covers our legislative structure, highlights our major projects, and it talks about the status of those projects and where we're headed for the year to come. As you all know, we have a very vast portfolio of projects where we've utilized our legislative capabilities in a very broad and comprehensive fashion in servicing our public and private stakeholders statewide. I will say that 2023 is a very active and productive year in many respects. We took steps to more effectively manage our vast portfolio of projects while continuing to proactively reach out to our state and local partners to help them with their economic development objectives. This led to the stabilization of our broad portfolios, particularly in student housing, as Elizabeth had mentioned, which currently stands at over 90% occupied. And it led to the pursuit of many exciting and in some cases award-winning infrastructure and community development projects throughout the state. Medco was able to offer advisory services as well to help with a few major priority initiatives, if you will, to include identifying potential locations for cannabis incubators throughout the state, as well as contributing to the important work of the new Maryland Thoroughbred Racetrack Operating Authority. Our efforts were further guided by our first strategic plan, which we completed and issued in 2022. The substance of this plan addresses many of the needs that were also identified in the comptroller's recent economic report, highlighting the not only the assets that Maryland has, but areas where we need to have enhanced performance. Some of the areas of key focus for Medco are targeted industry development, where we're going to work more closely with our Department of Commerce and TEDCO to maximize those areas of competitive advantages and opportunity. Secondly, innovation capacity development, where we're working more closely with our higher ed institutions and our federal laboratories to help them promote technology transfer and mission enhancement. Third, to support inclusive and equitable economic growth, where we're working with our local partners to address needs of the underserved populations and their communities throughout the state. Last year, we're very proud to report in our managed projects that we were able to achieve between 32 and 35% minority business enterprise engagement in our projects, and whereby we paid out over 31 million to MBE vendors as part of those projects, project execution. And finally, our last area of core focus is strategic placemaking. And this is where we're working not only with the federal labs, military bases and higher ed institutions, but we're working with Commerce and Department of Transportation and DHCD to look at where we have key infrastructure that may be underperforming that we could better utilize. And this includes areas like transit-oriented development and higher ed institutions that need research facilities. So we're really trying to focus our efforts in that way to be more strategic and maximize our economic potential. So it's with this refined focus that we've helped to foster a lot of transformative projects, such as the reconstruction of the new Hellman Garage, which afforded resources to help with kicking off the Annapolis City Dock project, the development of SCIF facilities that support federal mission objectives in Southern Maryland, supporting private investment in the new Reservoir Square mixed-use development in Baltimore City. I think the private developer is going to invest over $100 million in that project. And we've been hand in hand working with them to help make that happen. And I had mentioned the work that we're doing with the Maryland Department of Transportation, where we're helping to re-envision transit-oriented development opportunities all along the Mark Penn line. We're also working in Cambridge to help develop new waterfront communities. And we're continuing to work with our friends at Morgan State University in their robust efforts to expand that campus and continue to be one of the hottest performing HBCUs in the country. So with all of this, we'd like to say that we share our governor's enthusiasm for what's possible. And we look forward to working with you, the legislature, and our governor to be a critical solutions provider driven by our core values, which are equity, integrity, community, and excellence. So working in this matter, we are confident that we can and we will grow Maryland's economy for the benefit of all. And with that, again, I'd like to thank Elizabeth for her help, and we're here to answer any questions you may have and get you out on time, hopefully. So thank you.
They mentioned at Morgan the other day that they have 10,000 students and they can't take any more because they don't have any room.
It's amazing. We were going through the pandemic and a lot of people were talking about the decline in enrollments. And there are some select institutions, much like Morgan, that we can't keep up.
They're growing. Yeah,
So
it's great.
We're doing what we can.
Absolutely. Are there any questions from the committee members? I think we're good. Enjoy your Friday afternoon.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a good weekend. Go
Thank you.
Ravens.
This ends